Good evening. My special guest this evening, coming to you from Washington, D.C., is Congressman John Rhodes. Congressman Rhodes has spent 30 years in Congress, and we're going to spend this program looking back on his career and seeing a little bit of how Congress has changed and some of the highlights. So I'm glad you're with us. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Ellen. Nice to be with you.
John, by way of background, you started out as a farm boy in Kansas?
No, I wasn't a farm boy.
Oh, okay.
My father was a retail lumberman, and I sort of grew up in a retail lumber yard. And as I got older and a little more muscular, my father put me to work doing things like unloading sand and gravel and lumber and cement and whatever. And I've always been grateful to him for the fact that he taught me early on that you do have to work in order to eat.
Good idea.
It wasn't a bad idea at all.
And so then you took your undergraduate work at
Kansas State University.
And then went on to
Harvard Law School.
Mm-hmm. So how did you end up in Arizona?
Uncle Sam did that. That was one of the kindest things he ever did for me, and he's done a few kind things. I was stationed at Williams Air Force Base when it was ACAFS number 7, Higley, Arizona, before it was ever named. And in fact, I was one of the very early officers to sign in. I'd had an ROTC commission from Kansas State, so I was called to duty as a first lieutenant and sent to the Air Corps because they needed administrative officers. So I became, after about a year or so, I became base adjutant at Williams Field, and later what they called Director of Administration and Services, which was sort of an administrative executive in charge of practically everything back of the flying line. And while I was there, Betty and I decided we liked Arizona, and I'd never taken a bar examination, so I decided to take the Arizona bar, and I did it while I was still in uniform, and luckily passed it so that I was ready to practice when I got out of the service.
Did you marry an Arizona girl?
No, Betty's from Kansas. We came from the same town in Kansas. She went to Baker University, which is a Methodist-oriented school over near Kansas City. And I went, as I say, I went to Kansas State. She was 3 years younger than I, and that was pretty young back in those days. And so I didn't really notice Betty until I came back from law school after my first year and noticed this really good-looking gal that I hadn't really known existed before. But I certainly found out that she existed rather quickly, and in fact, we started to date almost immediately, and then we were married in 1942 after I had been called to active duty.
So then you settled in Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
and how many years before the political bug hit you?
I practiced for about 6.5 years in Mesa, and during that time I got involved in varying degrees in political endeavors. You may remember, no, you wouldn't remember, you're too young. Arizona was very democratic in those days, just about as democratic as any state in the far south. So having been raised as a Republican, I looked around for some others, and we found a few, and we started the Young Republicans, and in 1950, we drafted Howard Pyle to run for governor. Well, you know, if I'd been Howard, I probably wouldn't have accepted the draft, but he had always wanted to be governor, so he did, and he was successful, and I was the candidate for Attorney General, and that's sort of an interesting story. Barry Goldwater, who was Howard's campaign manager, called me, and after passing the time of day, he said, you had something to do with drafting Howard for governor. I said, yes, I did. He said, all right, I'm drafting you to run for Attorney General. And I said, but Mr. Goldwater, I don't want to be Attorney General. And he said, don't worry, you won't be. So even back in those days, he was telling it like it was, because I wasn't, but I did run a good race, and Howard and Barry and I did a lot of campaigning together, and So after Howard was elected, he needed some legal advice from time to time, and as one of the Republican lawyers who had been on his team, along with Orm Lewis and Dick Fenimore and others, we all sort of pitched in to help him because he did have a Democratic Attorney General, and we wanted to make sure that he got good legal advice. So from that, I got on the Board of Public Welfare and got to be known a little bit more, so that when 52 came and Howard was running for re-election and Barry was running for the Senate, the temptation was great to get on the ticket. So I decided I would run from the 1st District of Arizona for this job, which I now have. And Dwight Eisenhower's coattails were very big that year, and Barry and I were elected, and Howard, of course, was re-elected. So we've sort of gone from there politically.
From there. Okay, let's leave you for temporarily with the term of President Eisenhower. We'll come back, and I want to ask Congressman Rhodes about serving in the Congress under Eisenhower and Johnson and Nixon and so on. We'll be right back. Congressman Rhodes just reminded me during the commercial that I left out John Kennedy in the list of presidents that he has served in the Congress under. So let's start. What was it like, your freshman term, to serve under President Eisenhower?
Well, may I correct you? We don't serve under a president.
Sorry.
We serve with a president.
I'm sorry. And I knew the minute that came out that I had said that incorrectly.
All right. President Eisenhower, of course, being the first one I served with, is still sort of my ideal. He has been characterized as a do-nothing president. He wasn't. But he had that faculty of knowing what to do and when to do it. He was serving in a time when the people of the country needed stability. They needed more or less tranquility. The economy was going well. There wasn't anything really that you could do to help it, and what you might do might hurt it. And he knew that. So I think he was a very effective president for the time. And I also think if he had been serving in a different time, he would have been effective there too. He was a unique man in every sense of the word. Particularly unique in being able to put together a good staff. I still think that the Eisenhower White House was probably after the usual shakedown period, which was probably the best one I've known. They knew what to do, they knew when to do it, and their congressional relations were superb, as witnessed the fact that although the Democrats were in control of the Congress for 6 of the 8 Eisenhower years, the legislative program went through. Sam Rayburn and Lyndon Johnson were the ones that were mainly in charge of the Democratic side during those years, and they had great respect for President Eisenhower. So as a result, they were quite productive years.
And then, let's go on, President Kennedy.
Well, then along came President Kennedy, and of course President Kennedy was elected mainly because there had been a short recession, a very serious, well, it was a steep recession in about 1958, and nothing was done about it. And that probably was a political mistake on the part of the President Eisenhower. So that Kennedy ran on the basis of getting the country moving again, and also there was talk of a missile gap, and it scared people. That was right after the Russians launched their little Sputnik, and there was fear that we had let the Russians get too far ahead of us, so that this was also a campaign issue. John Kennedy was not successful in doing the things which I'm sure he would like to have done. His legislative program wasn't going to be adopted. There wasn't any doubt about it. It was just dead in the water. And after his assassination, Lyndon Johnson picked up that legislative program, and using the horror which everybody felt at the death of President Kennedy, and the genuine feeling of sadness. You might not agree with John Kennedy, but everybody liked him, and genuinely grieved over his death.
Could I just back you up for a minute?
Yes.
Why do you think President Kennedy's legislative program went cold in the water?
I think there was a perception in the Congress and in the country that he was trying to go too far to the left, too rapidly, and quite unnecessarily. There was really a sound basis for prosperity in the country. There wasn't any great amount of unemployment, and it just seemed like it was doing too much, too fast. And as I say, I don't think that the Congress was going to adopt it. But along comes the assassination, along comes Lyndon Johnson with his expertise in getting things done legislatively, and we did pass the whole Kennedy program. Instead of the New Frontier, it became the Great Society. And I happen to think, you know, this will sound political, that that plus the Vietnam War laid the foundation for the inflationary situation which we now have. I won't say that it was completely responsible, but I think that it headed us in the direction which we weren't able to head off fast enough to keep us from going into a really severe round of inflation.
Do you think that Lyndon Johnson, historians are now going back and saying that history was unkind to Lyndon Johnson and that he may well indeed be one of the great presidents? How would you assess that?
I don't think Lyndon will turn out to be a great president. He had the capability of getting things done. And from a technical and manual standpoint, you might say that he was as capable as any president as I've ever known. But once again, he did not have what Eisenhower had, which was the capability of knowing when to do things and what to do at a given moment. My wife accuses me of saying this too often, but I've always felt that there are 4 dimensions. And you know, the three that we know about, the 4th one is time. And time is probably the most important of all, because you can do things today which are absolutely right today. If you do them tomorrow, they'd be absolutely wrong. And if you had done them the day before yesterday, they might have been absolutely wrong. And Johnson was not good at timing.
He was kind of like a bull rushing through?
Yes, yes. And I think that he felt that his political base had to be bolstered by appealing to the so-called have-nots, and also now some of the civil rights legislation which was adopted in the Johnson administration was very good, and we, you know, I voted for the Voting Rights Act myself, and always have, and I think that it was definitely the way to go. But when I say that his sense of timing was wrong, I'm thinking more of the economics and the institutions aimed at doing things that probably didn't really need to be done in the areas of welfare. And so, anyway, timing is important.
All right. With that, we'll take a time for a commercial, and we'll be back with Congressman John Rhodes. Congressman John Rhodes is my guest this evening, and he is being so kind as to share his recollections in almost 30 years in the United States Congress with us of all the various presidents. Now, along about this time, well, we're up to President Nixon. Now, you came in as House Minority Leader right about this time?
No, it was in 1973, December of 1973. You'll recall that the Vice President of the United States, Spiro Agnew, had resigned, and that Gerald Ford was named as Vice President under the, what is it, 22nd Amendment, 23rd, I guess it is. And therefore, the position of Minority Leader was vacant, and I was elected by acclamation, I'm very proud of that, by my confreres as the Minority Leader. And I served in that position in the remainder of that Congress and through the next 3 Congresses.
All right. Well, can we catch back up? We're now at President Nixon.
President Nixon had tremendous capabilities as an individual. back when I first came to Congress, President Nixon, of course, was the vice president. He was elected with Eisenhower. Some of us younger members thought that Eisenhower wasn't political enough. Some of my best friends were also freshmen from California and friends of Nixon. So I got to know President Nixon a bit early on. And I was impressed with the fact that my colleagues, were impressed with his capabilities. In fact, they used to say, oh, if we could ever get Nixon as President of the United States, the Republican Party would really take off like a big bird and we would be in forever. Well, Nixon, of course, was the nominee in 1960. He could have won, but I guess we can recall that ill-fated debate between Nixon and Jack Kennedy, where Nixon was supposed to just murder that poor senator from Massachusetts and didn't at all. And there is a lot of conjecture about what happened there. One of the things that happened, of course, is that Nixon was made up to look like a ghost, and he really looked terrible. But also, he appeared to be diffident and retiring. He would not attack Kennedy, and the story I got was that was the strategy. Don't give Senator Kennedy, don't give the people a feeling of feeling sorry for Senator Kennedy. Well, they certainly didn't feel sorry for him. There wasn't anything to feel sorry about. He did very well. So anyway, then Nixon ran for governor of California unsuccessfully, and said to the press after the day after election, we'll never have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore. So that most people thought that he was dead. Well, after the 1964 election, when the party was really pretty leaderless, we were trying to do what we could to recover in 1966, because we had lost a lot of seats in the Congress, and we needed to do what we could. Nixon came forward as the one who was most capable and most willing to go out and help Republicans get elected to Congress. And that was the beginning of his comeback. He came back very strongly, and then, of course, as you know, was nominated in 1968 for the presidency and was elected. And his first term was extremely successful. He was able to get most of his legislative program through, and the economy was going along rather well, although there was, we thought, a terrible amount of inflation. I think it got up to 6% per annum, which, of course, we would love to have almost any time now. But mainly it was quite successful. And then along came Watergate, and you know the rest.
Then Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford was my predecessor as minority leader and my very good personal friend. I was the chairman of the policy committee while he was minority leader, and we worked as closely together, I guess, as two people could. As a matter of fact, Jerry and I agreed on so many things that when I had to be out of town, and at a time when Congress was in session and there might be votes, I never did tell my legislative assistant how to vote on a given bill. I would just tell him to pair me the way Ford voted. And I never but once, I think, during that whole time, was I embarrassed by the side that I found myself on. So Jerry and I were quite close, and when he was president, we we kept a good personal relationship. Although you never are as close to a president as you were to the man before he became president. So
did you still call? Did you? Well, you still called him Jerry.
Oh no, I did not. I
You
called
did
him Mr.
not?
President. Absolutely, and that's because of the office.
You just
it
do.
wasn't-
Your old pal is.
He was Mr. President, and so that's the way it had to be. And I still call him Mr. President when anybody's around. I don't. When we're alone, I don't. But no, he and he did what he needed to do as president. He needed the country needed confidence. They needed to actually have the feeling that somebody was in charge who was honest and capable. and he exuded that,
Okay.
and I think he did a very good job.
Can we leave the last two presidents?
Whatever you say.
Take time out for a very Republican cause,
Okay.
a commercial. We'll be right back. Congressman John Rhodes is reviewing his 30 years in Congress with us under the various presidents.
Not under the various.
I did it again, isn't it? Sorry. Serving with.
Thank you.
Serving our country in behalf of our country with the various
I
presidents.
accept your amendment.
Jerry Ford, you supported him. You've just said he was
I
a
did.
good friend. At one time, Ronald Reagan ran against Jerry Ford. When Ronald Reagan won the presidency, you stepped down as minority leader. Did they ask you to?
No. As a matter of fact, before the election of 1980, quite a long time before, I think it was about March of 1980, I announced that I would be a candidate for re-election to the House, but that I would not be a candidate for minority leader anymore. But if we were successful in getting a majority, I would be the Speaker of the House. So no, my stepping down had nothing to do with Ronald Reagan at all. As a matter of fact, I would have been pleased and honored to be able to help him in any way that I could in his legislative program. But it did come from my own feeling that 7 years as minority leader was just about all anybody ought to have to endure. And also the feeling that my own temperament was such that I probably wasn't doing as good a job as I should be doing. And that was sort of a self-appraisal. And I'm happy to say that there weren't very many people who agreed with me. But nevertheless, I felt that the time had come for me to move on.
How do you think President Carter fared?
Not too well, as witnessed the fact that he wasn't reelected. And there were various reasons for it. President Carter himself was a perfectly honorable and in many ways capable man. His incapacity consisted of an inability to put a staff together that served him well. And I would almost describe the whole failure of the Carter administration to the failure of people around the president.
And now, President Reagan.
Well, I think President Reagan has put together a good staff. You can always wish for better, but every White House has a shakedown period when a new president is elected. And I think that the Reagan people are pretty firmly in the saddle now and doing a much better job at this stage of their experience, certainly than the Carter people did, as good as the Nixon people, and I think they're coming along very well.
If you had been Speaker of the House, what would you have done? What would have been your main thrust?
Well, time. Right now, the most important thing that can happen in this country is to get a scenario toward a balanced budget in as short a time as possible. And by that, I mean, I know perfectly well you don't go from a $100 billion deficit to a balance in 1 year, but you certainly can do it in 3. And I would have insisted that we do that, and I think the main problem I would have had with the Reagan people would be that I would insist on raising more revenue than they seem to want to. I would probably not have gone for at least the last 10% of the tax cut, and most of the tax program and all of the reconciliation program I supported 100%. But I did not believe that the federal government's finances could stand the impact of the entire 3 years of the personal income tax cut.
Do you think that, well, some people are saying that President Reagan, once he gets on an idea, is locked in and won't change his mind no matter what. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
Well, he gives that impression, but I don't think that's really true. He has been known to change, but I think, again, he decides when it's time to change. And thus far, I'd say his timing is pretty good. That fourth dimension, I think he understands it.
What will happen with the House, with the budget? I tell you what, let's take a commercial and I'll come back and ask you that.
Okay.
All right. Congressman John Rhodes is my guest. Congressman Rhodes, the budget right now is up in arms. Now the Senate has sent what they would like, and they have passed that. What do you think the House will do?
I wish I knew. I'm on the Rules Committee, of course, and I guess that there were two of us who voted against the rule, which brought up this whole budget picture. And the reason I did is because there were 68 amendments allowed, which I think could make the whole thing sort of a shambles. In my opinion, the most important thing we can do is to pass some kind of a budget resolution. You know, we haven't done that for 2 years, and the country expects us to do it, and we can't even get to conference with the Senate unless we do. And yet there's a lot of talk that we'll just vote down all of these 7 substitutes that were made in order. I hope we don't. Naturally, I prefer the Republican substitute, but in order to get something into conference, I would vote for the Jones substitute if that is the way it seems necessary to go. The reason it's so important, of course, is that, you know, the bottom line of getting out of this recession is to get the interest rates down. And the money markets and the Fed are all looking at the Congress. What's the Congress going to do? Well, if the Congress doesn't do anything, then you're not going to get the interest rates down. You're not going to get the economy going again. And I think Congress will have completely failed the people.
Well, what I was specifically wondering is that the Senate is not running in toto this year,
Right.
but the House is.
That's correct.
Now, may I ask you to speculate what will come out of the House in view of the fact that everybody's going back home and running?
I think that the House figure will be lower than the Senate figure as far as the outlays and as far as the deficit is concerned. I hope that it is. I think the $116 billion deficit is something that the economy can't live with. I never thought I'd be happy to see a $95 billion deficit, but right now I would be.
You think we'll ever get down to a balanced budget?
Absolutely, we have to. And the people want this done, and if I could give the voters of the country any advice, it would be to make sure that you vote for candidates for the House and Senate who are absolutely pledged to balance that budget within 3 years.
How far off do you think our defense spending is?
Defense spending is in another category. It's the
well,
first thing
isn't that what's really causing?
That's one of the problems. Yes, but the first thing any government does is to protect its people. That's the first duty. How is subject to debate and conjecture. I happen to believe that in order to cut defense spending, and I think we must, we need to cut out weapon systems to reprioritize the whole defense structure. And if we do that, I believe that it will end up in cutting enough dollars so that the defense budget will help to balance the rest of it instead of being a hindrance.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this.
I have too.
And thank you for joining me on Talk It Over.